Hello and welcome to the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Thomas Molyneux. Thomas, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation today. It's a topic that I am sort of linked to, want to get out there a little bit more, and definitely want more people to be involved in. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, Thomas, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's quite hard to answer, but I would say for me anyway, it's a desire to build stuff. I love building stuff, and I don't know whether that is just to do with being a human being or whether it's to do with being a man, but I think that is something that I see in a lot of people, a lot of guys that I work with, is a desire to actually create and build and make the world a better place in one way or another. So yeah, just a desire to build. I know it's probably not a great answer, but we'll go with it.
It's your answer. That's the beauty of the question, right? And I just want as many men to answer that question as possible. So I'm always going to ask it. But Thomas, why don't you tell the listeners what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I help people overcome pornography addiction. Usually, when I say pornography addiction, it may kind of bring up this idea in people's minds that there's these people I work with that may be watching porn 3 or 4 times a day, they're completely out of control, and that's kind of how addiction looks. But just to kind of clarify on that, before we probably get into the whole conversation, a lot of the guys I work with, it's like maybe they're watching it once a month, once every few months. Some guys, yeah, it is multiple times a day for sure. But really, what I focus on is helping people get to a position where they can change their neural pathways, think things through very specifically, and be able to basically deal with the desire to watch porn in the right way so that they can live their life and never have to worry about watching porn again. Because for a lot of people, there's this worry that, I'm gonna relapse, I'm gonna go watch porn. And it's really about me helping, empower, and enable people to overcome the problem of watching porn, essentially. Yeah, that's what I do.
Amazing. Well, as I mentioned, it is something that interests me. It's something that I would like to discuss more. It's something that I have actively stepped away from. I think I'm coming up to 160 plus days now of not watching porn. And yeah, I want more men to be open around this conversation because it seems to be affecting us in a lot of ways, for sure. But let's touch on that addiction side. What is your definition of addiction to porn?
Yeah, good question. I would say essentially it's when you want to watch porn and you also want to stop watching porn, but you're unable to hold both those two things as true and experience the desire and not act on that desire. So essentially, there's this thing you want to do and you're unable to stop it. To me, that's like, okay, well, we've got a problem then. And whether we call it a compulsive behavior or whether it's addiction or it's a bad habit or whatever, to me, how I see it is there's a behavior in your life you want to stop. And if you do, then we've got a problem to work on there.
Amazing. So, in regards to sort of porn itself, why do so many men feel the need to watch it? Why do so many men rely on it? What is it that men seek through porn?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of people nowadays will say it's to do with disconnection, loneliness, shame, lack of self esteem, lack of confidence, and a absolute plethora of different challenging emotions that we all experience. But I'm going to actually provide a very alternative perspective from my own experience. So, prior to actually getting into porn addiction recovery work, I'd been and I have been until very recently not running. So I'd been doing volunteering at the Samaritans. Right through that experience, what I learned is a lot of people were actually experiencing the same emotions that I experienced when I was in the porn addiction. So the feelings of loneliness or the shame or the low self-esteem. So I was hearing these conversations like all the time on these Samaritans calls, people in really bad places. And the underlying emotions that they were experiencing were very, very similar to the feelings that I had in the porn addiction. a lot of them weren't addicted to porn though. It's like a 70-year-old woman who's lonely, but the feeling of loneliness is the same as the loneliness I had in the porn addiction, right? So I actually think the reason people have the desire to watch porn and why they end up in the porn addiction isn't actually to do with those feelings as such, because I think humans experience challenging emotions and that's just universal. Instead, it's that porn is like a drug. Like I see it as something like heroin or cocaine or whatever, and it changes the brain, and you start to develop a psychological, emotional dependency on it, especially from a young age. It's like if you gave a kid heroin from the age of 12 to 18, and then they only learned at like 18 that it's actually harmful. Well, they'd still have the craving for heroin because their brain would have changed and become addicted to it. So it's that relief from the temporary discomfort of withdrawal which people really want. That's why people continue watching the porn, because they're basically always in a state of withdrawal, and they want to get out of that state of withdrawal by consuming the content again.
Yeah, it is accessible for a lot of people. It's very easy to find, and it's also a little bit mainstream almost. It's almost accepted, right? It's a bit like having a beer, watching some porn is totally normal for a 14-year-old boy, for example. I'm pretty sure that was my similar experience with pornographic imagery, that sort of age. So why don't we touch a little bit on your story with porn addiction? How did it start? When did you decide that I'm addicted, and what did you do after that?
Yeah, sure. So I was probably around 11 or 12 when I first watched porn. Had literally no idea of the consequences. I was watching it up until around the age of 16, and it's a pretty like normal kid at school, I would say. Like so playing the football team and sort of hung around with just normal people. I just have friends and stuff, and I had this girl who like a lot of the guys, to be honest, at school were quite interested in at like 16. We were all 16, of course, or 15 or whatever. And there was this girl that I really liked as well, and so she ended up being interested in me as well. And we were talking on like Snapchat back then. I was obviously like really young and was messaging back and forth, but I'd always kind of been a bit in the friend zone, but like quite flirty. And I was a bit scared of like going any further with her, doing anything sexual, but I did want to. And that was going to be like my first time like having sex with her around 16 or so. So she comes around to my house in Sheffield where I grew up, and we're kind of getting it on. We're about to have sex, and then my dick just doesn't work. So I had erectile dysfunction, and I'm like, oh my god, like what is going on? Because I'd always been seen as quite like a confident kid at school, and and then like this moment happens, and it's just like such a contrast, and I'm like shit, and so yeah, my self-esteem, my confidence was like slapped in the face. It was like being punched in the face. Like it was painful. She leaves my house, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like what has happened to you? I go online and I discover this thing called NoFap, and it's like this big movement, millions of people trying to overcome porn addiction. And it's only then that I saw this correlation between me watching porn literally every night between 12 and 16, and I've just had erectile dysfunction, trying to have sex for the first time. So from there on, between 16 and like sort of 24 or so, I was kind of doing this like whole NoFap thing, trying to overcome it. Eventually, nothing was working. I set up a podcast. I had these guests from all over the world, and one of those guests had worked in addiction recovery like 35 years out in Portland, Oregon, and she had this method that was just completely different to anything I'd ever come across before. So I took a bit of a leap of faith, and I got coached by her. She taught me this method that I now teach, and it was the only thing that actually worked for me to change my brain. And then I overcame it really over the last like 16 months or so. So yeah, it's been quite a journey of a lot of ups and downs, a lot of wrong methods, doing things wrong a lot of the time, really. But a lot of pain as well along the way, and I could probably talk about that more. But yeah, that's about it, really. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I really want to touch on and sort of get your opinion on is that age of like 12 to 16. Boys are changing. Both genders are changing, right? But your testosterone's building. You've probably had your first erection and those side of things. But if we look at social media and we look at like the rise of, let's say, OnlyFans and that sort of content, the influences that these sort of people are watching tend to latch on to these OnlyFans models as well and bring those into their videos, into their streams, and that side of things. So you mentioned your journey and your sort of exposure to porn, but do you feel that it's getting worse? What are your sort of concerns for the future of porn consumption and the men of the future?
Yeah, I think it's a total mess out there right now, to be honest. Social media itself, I mean, it's just full of sexual content now. If you go on that Instagram Explore page, a lot of the time, it's not going to take long till you see a half naked woman. So yeah, for a while I was using social media and seeing sexual content on there. So for about 2 or 3 years, I didn't even use a porn site. I was just like literally accessing porn via social media. Nowadays, I almost see a lot of the porn site. I see a lot of social media as a porn site, at least for someone who has like addictive neural pathways. If you're trying to stop porn, you're still going on Instagram, scrolling and scrolling, seeing all these like half naked women. It's gonna have quite a similar impact on the brain anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's dangerous out there. It really is, and I think it's underestimated massively how harmful this is to people's mental health. Work with quite a few guys who are really young actually, and a lot of them will go off to therapy. And I've got one guy, I was actually doing a coaching session with him in Manchester in person the other day because he just happens to live around here, which was a weird coincidence because most people don't. But yeah, he was only like 20. He just turned 20 a few weeks ago, but he'd been in therapy since he was like 16. He's watching the porn, and it's just like this helplessness, which is so massive. It's like this feeling that the world's being created for you. Like you have to be on social media, and I don't have a choice. I've got to consume this content, or I just automatically watch porn, or I slipped up, or it's an accident, and this kind of language. So it's really the language which I want to help people shift and empower people and see that everything you do is genuinely a conscious choice in the present moment, and you don't have to consent to being on social media and letting the algorithms, spawn out all this sexual content and minimize it and be like, no, it's not porn, it's fine, when really it basically is porn nowadays, to be honest.
You've touched on a couple of things. You've touched on your own personal erectile dysfunction, and you've also touched on sort of the mental health of some of the clients that you work with. What are some of the other adverse effects? What are some of the things that you've seen from men that happen from consuming too much porn?
Yeah, I'd say it's shame for sure. Feeling like you can't really talk about this with anyone. Feeling like you're going to be judged by others. People thinking it's to do with sexual desire when I see it as, just a neuro sort of thing, like neural pathways have changed. Low self-esteem, low confidence, beating yourself up about it, just feeling awful, feeling out of control, feeling like you don't trust yourself. Yeah, just feeling emasculated, weak, lack of energy, feeling drained, lack of motivation. Just a whole host of really, really, really bad consequences. I think it is important to acknowledge, though, that it's 100% possible to watch porn and not have this whole list of adverse side effects.
Yeah.
I work with guys who want to stop it. I've also got a lot of mates who watch it and they're like full of energy and full of life and quite confident. So I definitely don't think that, oh, porn's the bad problem. It's just I do think for a lot of people it can become compulsive, and then it can sort of spiral and you have like the tolerance cycle. You end up looking at stuff that doesn't align with your sexual taste, and then that can lead to a shit ton of shame and feeling really bad, and this lack of integrity and honesty with the people around you.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you describe all of those side effects, it literally sounds like alcohol or some sort of party drug, or what you say, right? It's an addiction. It's interesting that you touch on people being able to consume it freely, and it's the same with alcohol, right? You see people that are very easy, they can have a drink whenever they want and not feel the need to have one. So there's definitely differing peoples in there for sure. We spoke before that we weren't going to go sort of into too much depth in regards to what people are watching and what people are consuming, but you did touch on that sort of side of things where people may go and view things that aren't aligned to their sort of sexual desires. Is that sort of a far distance into addiction, or would you say that that may be the starting point to realize that you are addicted?
Yeah, I think it can be a good indicator that you are addicted, because let's say you like finish the behavior, you've probably masturbated and watched porn to some sexual content, and you finish, and then you're basically repelled by the content you've just seen, and it just doesn't align with like who you truly are. at that moment, you're probably going to be in a mental state where you're like, okay, I've actually got like a serious problem. So there is definitely that. But yeah, I think chances are a lot of people will end up in that position because watching porn, it's like insatiable. It's like you watch it, you're gonna want more and more and more. But I suppose it's hard for me to necessarily know because I'm kind of in this echo chamber of working with guys who do have a problem with it. So pretty much all the clients I work with have ended up looking at stuff that doesn't really align with them. Whereas I don't know if like the average sort of guy who watches porn does end up at that more extreme sort of content or more content that just doesn't align with who they really feel like they are. So I've definitely worked with guys who've ended up looking at quite a lot of stuff that is like maybe like gay porn or trans porn. Like, there's this thing called like sissy porn. There's like things like femdom porn as well, and financial dominatrix and all of this stuff. So that's what I tend to see, where it's like people who are looking at stuff that actually almost feeds on the same helpless thought patterns that come from the addicted part of the mind, which are along the lines of, you're worthless, you don't deserve any good in your life, and it's like some of the content can kind of be created to evoke further feelings of shame. So it kind of works alongside the addiction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk around porn itself in causing issues in relationships. So the content that's being consumed is them being replicated in sort of sexual acts. But you mentioned sort of further and looking into deeper side of things, and then that shame coming through. Does that start to also enter sort of the real world, quote unquote? Is that then if you sort of continue down that path, is that sort of where you're going to end up? You're almost seeking shame within relationships. You're almost seeking uh, disappointment.
Yeah, perhaps. I suppose it's a bit like how if you're thinking about something a lot, then it's gonna kind of manifest itself into your physical reality a lot of the time. So yeah, I see this a lot really, where people don't sort of embrace or take on the next challenge in their life because of some sort of fear. So even this week, actually, there was a guy in our program who is doing really, really well in terms of dealing with the porn addiction correctly. And he started to like build up this really healthy relationship with his child self. So we talk about like the rational mind, the child self, and the addicted part of the mind, and these different players within the addiction. And what he's done is he's sort of put the rational mind back in control. And because of that, he's now in a position where the child self starts to trust him again. And he's a chef, and he was talking about how he was in the kitchen and it's like this new chef, and he was like flirting with her loads. And then at the end of the evening, she like wrote down on a bit of paper like her number and passed it to him. It's like some sort of it sounded like some corny like I don't know 2000s movie or something, but that's what he said anyway. And yeah, like that kind of side of things is really cool. But then it's like the opposite will also be true. To answer your question, it's like yeah, if you're watching content that's inducing shame, then you're going to be less likely to go out and pursue things in real life. And I see that with a lot of guys who are kind of living quite a sheltered inward sort of life where they are isolating and they're not going out and taking on new opportunities and connecting with people. And people often think that loneliness creates addiction, but I think it's more choosing to engage in the compulsive behavior, like being in the addiction, which actually creates the loneliness. So I see it as the other way around.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. There's definitely an argument for that, for sure. You're in your own spiral and you're basically creating your own loneliness. I can see that uh, being an option as the other being true as well. You're lonely, so you revert to that sort of content. But especially on the addiction side, it's definitely more of a spiral that you're going down. So I do agree with that. Let's sort of touch on your methodology, your sort of idea. So some guys might be listening to this and go, you know what? I am actually addicted to porn. Everything that these guys are saying is how I'm feeling. It's what's happening to me. It's the route that I'm going down. So if someone's listening and they want to start moving forward away from that, what are some actionable steps they can take?
Yeah, I would say a really good starting place would be recognizing that you do want to engage in the behavior and there's literally nothing wrong with like who you truly are, because a lot of people at first think it's to do with their sexuality and it's to do with like some deep trauma, all this sort of stuff. And that may be, partly related to why you first started watching porn at a young age. But to me, the wider, most common problem is porn is like a drug, and people are looking at it from a very, very young age. They're getting hooked on it. It changes their neural pathways, and then they're going to continue to want to watch it. And there's literally no shame around that. It's just that's our society, and it's almost like this problem happened to you. It's not your fault. And so the very first thing that we teach, like within our full program, is okay, yes, you are going to want to watch porn, and there's nothing wrong with you, and sort of getting into that neural pathway of compulsive desire so that we can start to go through and think through that whole choice and make a rational choice in that moment when you have that desire to start to change the neural pathways. The other thing I would say is probably to avoid a lot of the content out there on how to overcome this problem. Just from my own experience, I was honestly in a cycle trying to deal with this for over 9 years and just looking in the wrong places completely, because the mainstream sort of content on this issue is often curated by people who are completely clueless. They've never even been through the addiction themselves. So you got like people like urologists talking about installing blockers and removing your triggers and doing all this sort of stuff. But if you go down that route, or even the no-fap route, you deny yourself the opportunity to have the feelings of empowerment of actually getting into the neural pathway of compulsive desire and dealing with the urge correctly. So a big thing would be to learn how to deal with the urge instead of avoiding and distracting and substituting out the porn for other behaviors. Because really, to actually get to a place where you actually have the real peace of mind and freedom, you want to be in a position where you can literally deal with any urge at all times, and you're solid on how to do that. Otherwise, you're always going to be kind of running away and have this defensive sort of reactive approach, which is never going to actually lead to permanent mental freedom, which is absolutely possible.
So let's use me as an example, right? I actively said, well, basically, I did a post on porn, and I was like, well, I can't talk about porn for boys in this scenario without understanding porn myself. So I was like, I'm not going to watch it because there's a lot of conversation around not watching it not being normal sex, all of these sort of standardized things. So I said, I'm not going to watch it. Obviously, I had a desire to watch it, and I wanted to do that. But for the purpose of what I was doing, I made a conscious effort and a conscious choice every time to say, not watching it today because, ironically, I want to do a post that after 69 days, I've not watched porn for 69 days. So it's going to take me a while to get 69 days if I keep starting again all the time. So there was many urges and many things like that. But there was never a blocker on my phone. There was never leaving a phone in the room, or I don't know, closing my eyes whenever a woman walked past. These are just examples. Is that sort of the idea, the sort of the concept? And also, what are some of the things that you've seen that you just know don't work for guys in the long term?
Yeah, good question. And yeah, I mean, that approach sounds pretty good in terms of focusing on actively choosing to abstain because you want something else in that moment, and not, installing blockers or doing anything like that. Because, yeah, in the past, like I honestly, before I learned how to deal with this properly, I was like leaving my phone in the locker at work and just doing all these different weird restrictions and rules and conditions, and just on this hamster wheel of self improvement trying to deal with it, which is what I'd really avoid. But yeah, something you said there, which is interesting as well, is like not watching porn. And this is just like a subtle shift in language, but we always encourage clients to say to themselves, like, what am I choosing to do and why? And so just one shift that you can make in your own mind is like, I'm choosing to experience this temporary discomfort of the urge because I want to post on LinkedIn on day 69, right? Like, if you said that to yourself repeatedly, like you're going to be so willing to experience the discomfort because there's this thing that you want to do at the other side of the discomfort. Whereas if you're focusing on like not doing something, what can come up for some people is these feelings of deprivation where they're kind of focused on like not doing it, and there can be this resistance, and it's like, oh, I've got to do this thing, like, I don't want to stop watching it. But it's like, well, yeah, it's true that you want to watch it and it's going to feel uncomfortable, but it's also true that you do want to stop it. So if you can see both are true and actually just in the present moment, you've always got a choice. It's going to help a ton essentially. But yeah, more stuff on what to avoid. Definitely just anything that gets you away from connected to the reality that you do always have a choice. Anything that's disempowering, because even things like 12 steps, I know they're very popular, but it's all about kind of accepting that you're helpless. Whereas I'm like, no, like you're only going to be helpless if you choose to be helpless. Like helplessness is a choice that you can deal with this part of your brain. Absolutely possible. You can rewire the brain to a position where you don't even experience the desires anymore. So that's possible as well. But it does require some training and some work.
Do you think steps like that sort of feed that shame that has sort of been built up over the time, where it's like you have to admit that you're an addict and that you essentially are worthless, and that now you have to put all of these barriers in the way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think talking about it in things like 12 steps and sharing it with other people can definitely alleviate the feelings of shame and actually be helpful in that way, because you start to realize like you're not alone. There's literally loads of other people with the exact same sort of thought patterns as you, and that can be good. So that can be actually quite a good starting place, is talking about it. But in terms of, yeah, like submitting to, I don't know, like a higher power, or sort of saying, yeah, I am helpless and, I do have this problem. I think there's a fine line between accepting the reality of your addiction and what's going on right now in your neural pathways, which is a thing that's temporary and can be changed, and going, yeah, I'm an addict. Like, because an addict is based on identity, and that's like something that you're going to live with for the rest of your life, which is what 12 steps teaches basically. It's like, yeah, you're an addict, you're going to have to deal with this for the rest of your life. Whereas I'm like, well, actually, from a neuroplastic standpoint, you can change your neural pathways. You don't have to live with addiction for the rest of your life. It's just something that's going on right now. And if you think through that choice repeatedly, change your neural pathways in the correct way, then you're not going to be an addict in the future. So why would you choose to be an addict for your whole life? But this is why it's so important to not do the traditional routes of blockers, removing triggers, because if you do that, you deny your opportunity to actually think through the urge, and it's thinking through the urge and dealing with it correctly which rewires the brain and gets you out of an addiction. But if you're always removing the triggers and putting blockers in place and, locking your phone away in a cage, which some people have done before they join us, it's like you're never actually going to get free. Like you're always just going to be trying to sort of deal with the addiction in this defensive, powerless, sort of helpless way.
Yeah, and I think those sort of things snowball, right? So I actually stopped drinking alcohol, ironically, because I'd done a podcast with some people that were talking about reducing alcohol consumption. I'm trying to get up to a year, so my alcohol consumption has been zero for 260 days. My porn consumption has been zero for 160 days, but I felt after 100 days of non-alcohol, I had more self-respect, more ability to just say, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to keep building on those steps. Whereas those other ideas of addiction are all about taking away, aren't they? Right. And it's just rather than empowering and producing you in more of a self-esteemed way, I guess. So do you see that from some of your clients? Do they have other addictions, maybe gambling, maybe drinking, maybe drugs? Do they then start to look at their life in general once they've cracked the porn?
Yeah, big time. Yeah, the way I see things is there's these neural pathways of compulsive desire when you're in withdrawal, and really what the brain wants is just to get you out of that discomfort of withdrawal. That's what people really, really want. But then the brain will glamorize things like porn and be like, oh, it's so amazing. What new content is out there? Like, I wonder if my favorite OnlyFans model has released some new picture or whatever. So the brain will glamorize it to try to get you out of that temporary relief of discomfort. But when you're in that withdrawal, there will be other things like the addicted part of the mind will try and latch onto to get you out of the discomfort in a similar way. So yeah, it could be overeating, it could be scrolling on social media, it could be alcohol, it could be gambling, it could be, many different things really. So yeah, I see it as all kind of part of the same sort of package in a way. And that's the thing with porn is, again, people think it's to do with like sexual desire, but I just see it as addiction and being in a compulsion. And as you'll know from your experience, when you start one behavior and you have sort of a fundamental way of doing that and these underlying principles of going about that in the right way, that's going to bleed into these other areas of your life. So you start with stopping the alcohol, you realize, oh, whoa, I actually don't need to be like a slave to that desire and conform to what everyone else is doing. Let me give it a go with porn. And then you do that with that. And then you're like, oh, actually, I'm going to stop scrolling now on social media. You do that with that. And, you can kind of get to a position where you realize, you don't need to do any of these behaviours which we want to stop. Like, you really don't. And if anything, I would say that's the way to do it, because if you don't, what can happen is people can go down what we call a detour to disaster, where you just substitute out one addiction for another. So let's say someone in our program came to us trying to quit porn. They start overeating. They're doing, 4,000 calories a day because they're over in the States and there's all this crazy food out there. That really, I've kind of seen that happen. They just substitute out the porn for the food. What will happen over a few months is their neural pathways won't actually change because they've not gone through withdrawal correctly. And unfortunately, they would become what we'd call like a fat porn addict. It's like, it's not what you want. It's really, really not what you want. So we're quite clear on, throughout our process, you want to be applying the same method to literally all compulsive behaviours. That's why the program's called Beyond Compulsion. It's about going beyond it in all these areas of life so that you actually feel empowered and it sounds unreal, but like literally wasting zero time a day, like never ever engaging in a behaviour you want to stop. It's so possible, but it seems like so rare nowadays, I feel.
Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times. One perfect example is Lionel Sanders, who's the triathlete who was addicted to cocaine. He's open about his addiction with cocaine. Now he runs Ironman professionally, but he's never happy. At the end of any race, you can see that there's a demon still there, that he's essentially just addicted to training, running really far, cycling really far, and swimming really far. And you can just see it, and it's quite sad. I mean, he's very successful in what he does, but he has just swapped cocaine for ultra endurance, which is just mental.
Yeah.
You might say
Sounds
that,
like, David Goggins?
yeah, it's
Yeah,
the
kind of
same.
sounds a bit like him. Yeah.
Yeah, you might say that for some party boys that are doing sort of like high roxes and running ultra marathons, but
Yeah.
that's their own demons that maybe they should look at as well, for sure. One thing that we touched on earlier, which is the increase of accessibility of porn, this increase of ease for it. Like when I was a kid, it might have been a magazine, someone might have got a nuts, and that might have done the round at the school, and that was amazing, and that was like a big thing. Whereas now it is very easily accessible, so that drug that we're now essentially referring to it as is a lot more available. If you were to go back in time, or if you were to speak to a sort of 12-year-old or your son now, what are the things that you would encourage or discuss around the consumption of porn and that exploration of essentially becoming a man?
Mm. Yeah, I think I'd want to focus on the consequences of the porn. I wouldn't want to say, look, you can't watch porn, this is gonna destroy your life if you watch it, and you're not allowed to do it, and things like that, because that would lead to what we call feelings of deprivation, where people feel like they can't do it, which is probably going to create resistance and lead to them wanting to do it even more. But more just being like very clear on, look, this stuff is really, really going to hurt your mental health. So we have remember letters in our program. So we have probably over 100 of these remember letters where people have wrote down their experience of being in the porn addiction, and they're pretty dark. It's just like talking about missed opportunities, lack of self-esteem, looking in the mirror and just feeling like a complete zombie, being disconnected from family and children and all of this stuff. And these remember letters, it's usually like one piece of A4 paper, and a really good tool for anyone listening if you are in the porn addiction is to write one of these remember letters to yourself and really like face the reality of this addiction and this problem. But yeah, I'd want to just like stand up in front of some like kids in a school or something and just like read out like a list of these remember letters and just be like, look, this is possible. If you watch porn, this could be your life in the future. I've seen it happen with so many men. So that's an option for you. You can choose that if you want, but just knowing like there's some serious consequences here, and it can be like a drug. Because for me, I've never touched hard drugs like heroin because I know that if I did, I would have got addicted. Whereas with porn, I'm looking at porn at 12 years old with literally zero idea that's even a little bit harmful. Like literally no idea about erectile dysfunction until that experience when I'm 16. So just raising people's awareness that it's not just about like, oh, don't watch this because it treats women badly in the videos and it's misogynistic and feminism and all this, but more, look, this is actually going to harm you. Like, this is your life. Like, you get to choose for yourself. but it's going to harm wider society in these ways. And yes, maybe one of the consequences is the harm to women and all of that for sure. But more just like, you don't have to do this to yourself, man. Your life's going to be better if you don't. So it's up to you what you want to do. And maybe even give it a go, watch it, and then see how you feel afterwards. Because I mean, most people feel pretty terrible after they've done it anyway. So you're empowered to know that for yourself. Like, you don't even necessarily need someone to teach you it. But I think having more role models going like, look, this is harmful. Let's actually stand up to this and not just be kind of passive around it. Yeah.
Yeah, role models on it is really important, or an interesting sort of thought process, because porn's so readily available. Like, it's essentially an advert. Sex sells. That's a common sort of thing that's said. Yet no one really talks about it. It's just sort of like there. Like, everyone's like, look at all these OnlyFans models. Look how empowering they are. Look at all this. Like, but there's never like any deep conversations around the problems that it can cause, both for society and both for individuals. Why do you think that is? What needs to change for that to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need a culture where men feel empowered to stand up and talk about the harm that OnlyFans will do to their mental health. Because so far the agenda, as you say, is, oh, look, all these women empowered to make money online. But like, when you zoom out of that, it's like, well, that's not a good thing. Like, that's not what feminism was created for. It's like, feminism is about equal opportunities for men and women. It's not about men essentially being exploited by an addiction, which is like really, really harmful to them. So I don't know why no one ever really talks about this, to be honest with you, about the actual downside to men and how addictive it can be for them. But I think that's one thing to definitely bring up, and also, not condemning the women necessarily, but more educating men that they don't have to live that life, and maybe setting a different example of the life that they can live. Because I don't think any men actually want to be on OnlyFans, paying loads of money. It's just they've not really seen an alternative. Like, they've not got another opportunity to step into. Maybe they're working some job they hate, and they're not having a lot of luck in their relationships, and they're not happy with that. And then they're going online and they're seeing these, very attractive women, and they want some sort of escape, perhaps, from their daily lives. So they go down that route, and then it becomes like a bit of a drug, and they get into it more and more. And they can't see a vision for themselves outside of that life, because maybe that's what they're seeing on social media. And because social media can be like a drug in itself as well, it's like it just becomes this echo chamber of addiction, which is just a complete mess. And so it's hard to step away from that and see that you don't need money to be happy, but you want your peace of mind and your self-control and your self-trust, and to be making choices you're proud of to be happy. But that's rarely sort of talked about on social media, because it's never really going to hit the algorithm or anything, is it?
Yeah, that's a big problem for sure. I did do a podcast a while ago with a guy called Ben Dunks, who goes into schools, talks around porn and intimacy, and he says whenever he posts anything on intimacy, the algorithm just shrinks it, and whenever he talks about porn, it seems to get boosted up a little bit. So maybe there is an element of it being sort of fed into the machine for sure, because, as I said, sex sort of sells. So, well, doesn't sort of, it sells. So yeah, there's definitely that for sure. What do you want to see sort of next in the men's space, and what do you really like at the moment, sort of in and around it, when it comes to just men's mental health in general, but also more specifically porn and porn addiction?
Yeah, good question. I think in the men's space right now as a whole, what I would love to see more of is people feeling empowered about their choices and the way they're thinking about things, but less about maybe gym, money, women, lifestyle, that kind of side of things, like the more sort of superficial side of things, in my opinion. Because I don't think everyone needs to have a six pack or be in stupidly good shape or go to the gym 10 times a week or anything like that. I think really what's good is just being able to think in a way which makes you pretty happy, and you feel good about your choices you're making. I think if you can live in alignment in alignment with your values, like that's a gift. Like you're doing good. Like you're winning in life. That's all you really need. It's like a really good Marcus Aurelius quote, which is, all you need in life are these: certainty of judgment in the present moment, action for the common good in the present moment, and an attitude of gratitude in the present moment for anything that comes your way. I really like that. It's like just the simplicity of living your life, trying to make good choices, being grounded in the present moment, and not being influenced by other people who have these crazy wild lifestyles like the Andrew Tates and Dan Bilzerians, and just kind of seeing them as just as hedonistic as anyone else, but they've actually been successful down the hedonistic path. That doesn't necessarily mean they actually are living like a good life. It doesn't mean they're actually living with good values. You know, shifting it more into values, I think, is important. And being a good person. You know, like the people I look up to most of my life are my dad, because I think he treats my mum incredibly well with respect, and he's just a nice, good person who cares for others and does everything for his family and his friends. I look up to my uncle because I love going to I'm a big Sheffield Wednesday fan, going to Sheffield Wednesday games with him. And, you know, he's always there again for family and stuff. And, you know, my dad and my uncle, they're not like rich, they're not out with like crazy women or going to the gym. They're just good people with good values. And then my previous boss, and I used to work in tech, a guy called Johnny. It's a really good, honest, genuine guy again, and just trying to make the world a bit of a better place. So, yeah, looking up to people with good values. I'd like to see that more. And in terms of the porn addiction space, I'm on a mission to really, really empower people and completely shift the way people are thinking about this whole thing entirely. I would love to build a program and community of guys that basically replaces the whole NoFap movement, because NoFap doesn't work and it doesn't fool our clients, and they're getting super, super passionate and talking about this now. And some of them are going, all right, I'm going to start making my own YouTube channel. I was talking to this like super smart software developer yesterday who's a client of mine, who's just like fallen in love with the method, and he's like gamifying a Duolingo kind of version of my program as well, and he's building that, and he's like, I'll send it to you when it's complete. And just like this, almost like an army of men who are like standing up to the wildness that the world has around us right now, with all the social media and porn and OnlyFans and all this, and just like taking back control and being like, no, I'm not standing up to this shit anymore. That's what I'd like to see. And yeah, I want to build a community around that. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. I'm very, very excited about it all, to be honest, for sure.
Amazing. Sounds awesome. If people have liked what they've heard, Thomas, why don't you tell them where the best place to find you is if they want to hear more?
Yeah, I'd go Beyond Compulsion Academy on YouTube. I've got beyondcompulsionacademy.com as well, if you want to get in touch at all. And the Help Is Here podcast as well. They're probably the three places.
Amazing. Thomas, it's been an absolute pleasure. If you have any final thoughts, I'll leave them with you now.
No, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. As I said to you before we pressed record, I was feeling a little bit down before because I had a YouTube comment which was not the kindest this morning, and I'm a bit of a sensitive soul, to be honest with you. I really am. So when I read that, I was a bit down, and then I said to you, you know, I'm looking forward to jumping on a call and sort of lifting my spirits up again. And this call's definitely done that. So just thank you for giving me the space and doing the work that you do and helping more men out there. Yeah, it's great.